So you guys, I think it's 1 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
So if everybody will mute themselves, and then put your questions into the chat box, and we'll monitor that. And if hopefully we'll get to everybody's questions that you have. So, and Pam, if you'll will you hit the record button so we make sure we get this recorded?
We are recording.
Okay. So first of all, it's always so much fun to do these We Talk interviews, and I'm just so delighted to have Bethany join us today. And Bethany's work is just beautiful, and I think she's got a lot of things to share with us. So, Bethany, welcome. And let's start off and just tell us about your journey, when you decided you were going to become an artist, and how that all has manifested into where you are today.
Oh, well, no pressure
No
of
pressure.
that question. Oh, I don't remember a time when I wasn't making something, really, truly. I began as a very little girl. One of my favorite questions to ask my students is, what is the first thing you ever remember making? Like anything at all. And mine was we would when I was little, when I was a little bitty girl, we would go to a place called Angel Fire, New Mexico, which is a beautiful location about 5, 6 hours from Amarillo, which is where I live in Texas, in the Panhandle. And my parents would let me pick out pieces of wood from people building cabins at construction sites. And I would take a little hammer and a nail, or a little rock and a nail, and I would bang on the piece of wood to create some kind of pattern, and then I would color it with crayons. And I thought I was just the best artist ever. I loved doing that. I loved working with my hands. I always worked with my hands. My grandparents were very resourceful and crafty. My grandfather was a former prisoner of war in World War II, and was one of the most creative people that I ever knew. And he always had us doing some kind of sculpture art with wire and wood, or painting rocks, or doing little melted crayon, crafty things, probably to keep us busy, honestly, out of his hair. But it really just uh, firmed up my love of working with my hands. I love to work and do DIY. And we had mentioned earlier when we popped in Bonnie, that I had always called myself crafty, but I never really called myself an artist, because I didn't have an art background other than just doing things on my own. I have a degree in theater. I have done a lot of singing and dancing and acting on stage mostly. And I really focused on that really from junior high into college. I was really a performer. I was in the band in high school. I played the oboe, and I played the oboe even in college. And so I was just always around lots of creative aspects of all different kinds of art. I always really loved to look at paintings, but I never really did them. I was really wanting to perform. At this point in my life, I thought for sure I would have won a Tony, and been and living in New York. But then after college, whenever I was performing outside of college, I got married and had my first baby, who's now, he'll be 24 this year. And I really started doing more photography, because I really wanted to capture every little burp and every little thing that he did. I was just enamored with my baby. And so I really started doing photography. And one thing about becoming an artist later on is that so many of these types of art, theater, photography, they all share color theory. They all share lighting and shadow. And so a composition, you compose a scene on the stage to make a pretty picture for the audience, and directing and singing and dancing. And in photography, which I did when he was young, and then I did it professionally for many years for families and brides and babies in town. I would compose a scene then again, looking at light and shadow. So all of that, all of my tapestry of creating kind of led me to the path of being an artist. I went on to have 2 more babies, living here in Amarillo, and my youngest is a little girl, or she's not little anymore, she's almost 18, but she at the time when she was about 2, I had that was when Etsy was really kind of getting off the ground with handmade art, and I bought a pastel that looked like my daughter, and it was from an artist in Jerusalem. Sadly, I don't know who it is because the signature is almost you can't read it, and I've researched it and I can't find who it was, but it was a portrait of a little girl and her mother in front of a birthday cake, and it looked so much like my daughter that I had to have it, and it was on a piece of brown paper sack paper. And when I received it in the mail, I just loved the vibrant colors I saw and the texture that I saw, and knew that I had kind of found something that I maybe wanted to try out. As somebody that's crafty or that works with their hands a lot, DIYer, of course, I'm sure many of you have other hobbies other than strictly painting with pastels, but that are my probably toxic trait is that I feel pretty confident that I could try to figure out how to do that. How am I going to do that? About most things, I can crochet. I'm going to figure out how to crochet, or I'm going to figure out how to knit, or I'm going to figure out how to retile my bathroom. I can do those things just working with my hands over time and being really comfortable with doing that. And so I decided I wanted to learn how to paint with pastels based on that little painting. And it was a portrait. I'm not a portrait painter. I've never really painted portraits, but it was just the texture and that gorgeous quality of those small crystals of the pastel. And at that time, it was way before a lot of social media or any kind of websites online. So I found Wet Canvas. I don't know if any of you remember Wet Canvas, the forum, when people would have a forum and you used to log in and you would have a little message board. And so I found Wet Canvas at the time and did some research and found out about sanded papers and Terry Ludwig pastels. And I started trying to kind of play with using some of these finer quality artist grade materials. So I did that for about a year, and I had my 3 kids. They were all under 6, under 5, really small. I had white carpet at the time, and it was really difficult for me to focus on being a mother, a stay-at-home mom, and trying to learn this new medium. And so I put my pastels away until I packed them up. The same box, I had this little box right here. I packed them up and put them in a closet, and we moved homes, and that same pastel box went to another closet and was stored there for years until about 2014. And the summer of 2014, my husband got laid off of his job, and it was just this really volatile, like, what are we going to do? We were all so worried about just different things. And I really needed a creative outlet to kind of handle some stress that caused in our lives. And so I remembered that I had the pastels in my closet, and I went to pull them out, and they were fresh and as beautiful as the day I had packed them away. And I started that day, and I would sit on the floor of our guest bedroom, which is downstairs, and I would take paper to a piece of cardboard, and I would sit on the floor just cross-legged, and I painted in my lap. And I started doing that for about an hour every single day because I didn't have to worry about the kids or about jobs or about anything. The only thing I had to worry about was what color do I pick up next? And it was such a wonderful time of growth. And I painted tiny little 4x4s. I was trying to save money, tiny little 4x4s. I would paint 2 or 3 a day. It was kind of in the daily painting movement that was happening when everybody was painting their peanut butter sandwich. And so that's really how it started. And I began getting bigger. And I started, of course, at that point, wet canvas wasn't really a thing anymore. But I found a local pastel society, which here it's called the Lone Star Pastel Society. And I would started going to some of their meetings. And then we had a show, we had an exhibit at a frame shop here in town, and I put some of my pieces in it. And I sold one, which was just such a huge boost of confidence for me. And from there, I really just started entering exhibits around the country, juried exhibits. I kind of got myself in trouble. I entered too many, and then it was so expensive to send the paintings. I didn't realize how expensive it was going to be to send paintings to those exhibits. But from that point, I really just could not get enough of painting with pastels. And then I started a YouTube channel, which kind of was born from having a theater background and doing some online DIY host. I had a job where I was hosting a show. And so I was really comfortable in front of the camera and I had experience talking in front of people. And so I just kind of jumped in feet first. And here I am today. And so I've been teaching online for about almost 7 years full time on Patreon. And I still exhibit around the country. I don't enter as many shows as I used to, just because of the expense and other factors. But I've been so lucky and so blessed with my wonderful students and people that have watched my videos and send me such wonderful encouragement. I've learned as much from my students as I hope they've learned from me. And so that's kind of my long-winded journey.
That's a great journey. So, so Bethany, are you not doing any other, using any other mediums in your art, or?
I don't really. Although yesterday I was painting with some acrylics just for fun. I had found some acrylics. This is kind of my temporary studio right now. We didn't really mention it, but I have breast cancer right now, and I'm going through chemotherapy treatment through the end of the year, and then we'll have some other medical things happening in the future. And so we needed to move some things around in my house, and so this is kind of my temporary space. It's not where I normally am. I'm so lucky to have it though, so I can come up here and have a little bit of therapeutic art. But in doing that, in moving some of my studio around, I found some old acrylic paints. I had to throw half of them away because they were dried out. But I have been taking some watercolor and some sketchbook things to my chemo appointments just to have something to do to pass the time. And I am such a beginner at it. I'm so much more comfortable with pastels. Of course, there are lots of things that we can that are similar. Of course, acrylics and watercolors, we still know about value and we still know about composition. But as far as the application, I'm not quite as good at it. But it's fun, and it's something that I can do to pass the time and to yeah, really just to pass the time and to do something creative in those moments. Spend the time in a positive way instead of a negative way.
Good, good, good. So let's talk about your process. I guess first of all, what do you have favorite papers that you like to use, or
I
substrate?
do. I have one of the funny stories is, let's go back to that summer of 2014. I had Wallace paper and I did not know, because I had been out of the art field for years raising my kids. I didn't know that they didn't make it anymore, and I let my daughter use it. She was like, at the time she was 12 or something. And so and no, she wasn't even that old. Anyway, I had no idea that you couldn't find the paper anymore. And I just was kind of willy-nilly with it. And so I had all this Wallace that I couldn't use anymore. But I quickly found UArt, and I use UArt probably for the majority of my pieces. I if I was downstairs, I could show you, but I buy it by the roll and I take it to my framer and I have the framer dry mount it for me, which saves me a lot of money. I don't have to necessarily buy their premier panels, but he mounts it. I just take him the roll and I tell him what size I want the paper so I can take a list. And then he does all of that for me, which saves me a ton of time. It's fairly affordable. I just use acid-free foam core, which is a little softer than the Gator board that UART uses. I like the softer quality of it, but then I can just use it and I don't have to worry about the curling. And now I have done that before. I prefer to use the 500 grit. I don't really know why. I like it a little bit finer than the 400. But I also love to use Lacarte. I mean, actually, all of the paintings that you see behind me are coincidentally on Lacarte. I love to use Lacarte for clouds, especially. To me, something about the paper just creates this really airy, magical effect with clouds. And I do paint a lot of clouds and skyscapes because I live in the Panhandle. We don't have a lot of trees and water. We have very, very little trees and water, actually. And so where as a landscape painter going to look, we're going to look up at the sky and we have amazing skies here. And so mostly Lacarte. I use pastel mat occasionally, but I really love to be able to move the pastel around on the paper. And I find pastel mat just really grips it a lot. And it even grips, it doesn't quite allow you to do as much alcohol washes or because it kind of soaks into the paper really quickly. I do like pastel mat and I have used it before, but not as much as Lacarte and UART. And of course I love Lux Archival, but I really prefer the toned papers because you have that middle value and you can really kind of go out from the middle out to the, either end of the value map is what I call it. And so that's pretty much what I use mostly.
Good. So once you've got your paper, then your process for starting your work.
Yes.
Let's just take it from.
Well, I tell people all the time, paper is such a huge decision because what you choose is going to really affect every decision after that, especially if you want to do any kind of wet underpainting. Obviously, if you're using Lacarte, that can be, you can't use that wet underpainting, although I heard that there's a new paper that Lacarte has. I haven't tried it yet. I don't know if anybody else has, but that is supposedly able to handle the wet situation a little bit better. I need to explore that. So obviously if it's Lacarte, it's pretty much just direct dry pastel onto the paper. I do usually start off with a mechanical pencil sketch. I just find mechanical pencils so easy. They're always sharp. You don't have to worry about sharpening them. It really melts into the paper. And then if I'm using UART, it's usually an alcohol wash with a hard pastel, kind of blocking it in. And then sometimes it's watercolor. It depends. I don't use quite as much watercolor, but then I also love to use acrylic ink washes. So I kind of like to do all of it. I really try to think instead of like, oh gosh, this has to be a pastel. I really just try to think, what does this art need? What does this piece need? And if it's not all pastel, that's fine. It's just I'm utilizing what is called for and what is going to help me get to that successful painting, no matter what it is. So I don't mind being mixed media. Of course, if you're in a show and there's parameters, you do need to think about that. But I try not to let that limit me within the creating process.
Nice. So let's move on to pastels. Do you have favorites? And what's your go-to?
Have you ever really met a pastel you didn't like? I mean, maybe, but very
Only one or two.
pretty rarely. Of course, I start with the harder pastels, new pastel, and then move into more of a medium softness, probably mostly Terry Ludwig. I love Mount Visions. They're so big and nice. Probably my favorite is Giraud. But these are all the pastels that I own. Like I don't have a ton. I have more extras, I guess, like where I've broken them in half, and they're downstairs in my original space. And so I try not to collect pastels as much as I like to curate my pastels. Um, I try to look at what I have and fill in gaps instead of just buying whatever, because then to me, it's almost like you have too many choices. It's like going on, I'm going to watch a show on streaming, and you watch and there's 1,000 movies and you have no idea which one you want to watch. Kind of feel that way about pastels. And so as pastelists, we all really have kind of a limited palette. We're limited to what we own. And that can really become almost a signature quality about our work, and are the colors that we use, because we can't mix color like other artists can, working in oil or acrylic or watercolor. So our colors themselves and what we choose can become part of our style. And I find that especially with a lot of artists, and a lot of my students say, well, I don't have a style. I don't know what my style is. And I always say to look at all, put a bunch of the majority of your work on the floor right next to each other and see how there is a common thread. And a lot of that is through color, because we have our limited palette. But I would say the majority of my probably are Terry Ludwig's, of course, Giraud, Mount Vision. I love Townsend's. I love Townsend's. They're some of my very favorites. If I could have a full set of anything, it would be Giraud and Townsend, I think.
Yeah, great choices, right? I
Hint,
think
hint,
there's
hint,
so many
hint,
great
anybody.
choices, right? There's
If
so
anybody
many
wants
great
to
choices.
send me some, I'll give you my address.
Yeah, there you go. Somebody asked Bethany to explain. Now she said the walnut ink for underpaintings, but I think you said acrylic ink, right?
Acrylic ink, yes, acrylic ink. And I have, let's see, do I have any in here right now? I do. So I have these acrylic inks. These are by FW Daler-Rowney. I love, there are other brands of acrylic inks. Liquitex has one as well. And I have quite a few YouTube videos on using these acrylic inks, but I love to use them. They're in these little droppers, and they're very, they're pretty strong colors. And so I dilute them with water. You can see my spray bottle. How do you do that? They're right there. There's my spray bottle. And so I will drop a little bit of ink into usually a pie plate or some kind of something that's easy to, it doesn't matter if it gets stained. And then I'll spray the water on it to dilute it. And then I like to apply that with various, like a sponge, like a natural sponge, or maybe a piece of fabric. Sometimes I'll even draw with the ink tip itself with the little dropper on the paper. And I prefer to use this brand mostly because it's not quite as highly chromatic. These are a little bit more, I wouldn't say muted, but I like this one is indigo. And there is a Liquitex brand that is also indigo, but it's really like vibrant blue. And this is a little bit softer. And so I like this brand a little bit more, but it's so fun to experiment with the acrylic ink. And I have some paintings that I will be happy to show here in a little bit when we get to that kind of will show you what that effect looks like. It's just very painterly. It's a little bit more opaque than watercolor, and it doesn't dry quite as light as watercolor. And so that's why I use it.
Okay, that's good. That's a great. I think underpaintings can just lend so much to the finished product, whether you are leaving a lot of the underpaintings show through, like with watercolors and things. I'm anxious to see some of your examples with the
Yes, I think underpaintings are such a game changer. I mean, they can really help you. For one thing, it kind of takes away the fear of the blank paper aspect that we all have had. It's hard to approach the easel every single day with a blank page. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Twyla Tharp, the creative habit, and how creativity, a lot of people, I'm sure so many of the artists here, your friends or your colleagues, people that aren't necessarily fine artists, they just think we're inspired all the time. We're just walking around inspired all the time, which I know for me is not necessarily true. But if you make creativity into a habit and you do it as much as you can and make it part of your day or part of your week or however many times you can get there, that when inspiration does strike, then that's the magic. I don't know why I started talking about that, but
Well, I think that's really
oh,
a good point.
the blank paper,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I think
And
it's a
so
good point.
Twyla Tharp, she's a famous choreographer, and she was saying how when she finishes a ballet or she finishes a dance, it's blank, like the stage is blank, and she has to begin anew. And we do every day. If you paint something every day, or if you paint it, we have a success, but then we have to put that blank piece of paper back on the easel, and there we are again with like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? Am I going to be able to have another successful piece? And so for me, underpaintings kind of helps me over that little hump of low confidence that I know we all can struggle with.
Well, and don't you think, Bethany, that even by putting an underpainting down, you're also preserving some of your pastel?
Yes,
It does,
absolutely.
it's the kind of the same thing as when an oil painter does
Hmm.
tones their board and so on. So
Right.
thanks for giving us that name of that book. It's always interesting to know what books inspire.
Hmm.
And so
Well, I
do you have
think
some favorites?
I do. I have lots of favorites, and once again, I would show them to you, but they're downstairs. I love, and now I can't think of a single one of them. I love Liz Haywood Sullivan's book about painting clouds and skies and
Mhm.
water. That's a wonderful book. I've looked at that book 1,000 times. Of course, Richard McKinley's Pastel Pointers books are wonderful. The first book I ever had on pastel was Bill Creevy's The Pastel Book. And of course, bless sweet Bill Creevy. The very first time I had an exhibit in New York, I was so nervous. I felt like, I don't know if any of you have ever seen Thoroughly Modern Millie with Julie Andrews,
Yeah.
but I felt like her. I felt like I was this little going from Texas off to the big city in New York, and I'm going to go to the big art show. And I felt so out of place. And of course, I'd been to New York before, but not in that capacity. And struck up a conversation with the nicest man. And we talked about airplanes, and we talked about the Texas Panhandle. And was telling me about New Orleans, and then he went on, and then I found out that that was Bill Creevy, and he just made me feel so normal and comfortable. It was a wonderful. So his book was the very first book I ever bought on pastels, and it is still a wealth of information about. And I saw that Thomas put in the chat Creative Authenticity. That's a fantastic book. Also,
Mhm.
I love that book. So I love Mitch Albala. I love
Bella.
his
Mhm.
Albala. I've never heard his name spoken, so I didn't know how you said that, but I love his books. And so I have quite a few. I wish I could show them all to you, but I especially in the very beginning stages of painting, I didn't have an outlet to learn. And so I studied books and I studied artists, and I didn't understand color. I didn't understand atmospheric perspective, because where I live, there's nothing in the distance. We don't have mountains. There's nothing. It's just grass as far as the eye can see for 365 degrees. And so we don't have water vapor in the air to make distant mountains. If there were, we don't have any to cool things down or to make it a lighter value. And so I've really had to like study it almost as science, like a science textbook versus being able to see it in person. And so books were a huge part of my early learning.
But I'll bet in your area you get some great sunsets and sunrises
Yes,
because of
we
the
do.
dust particles in the air.
Oh, yes. We
Yeah.
have, I mean, it's almost like being on an ocean of grass. We have the most, you can see a storm from, many, many miles away rolling across. And so it's really stunning. Although I did learn just in the power of observation, years of doing that. I used to play a game with my kids where we would be driving to the grocery store and I was trying to learn color. And so I would say, okay, kids, look at the sunset. And if that were a color, what color would you pick out? What color would that be? And I still kind of play that game with myself. Um, like what color, if I pick that grass color out of my pastel box, what color is it? And the thing is I'm not really a local colorist. I kind of push color. And so it's not even necessarily that I paint, but I wanted to learn the color. So then I could learn how to push it a little bit more than what I was seeing in reality.
So Bethany, shall we jump in and look at some of your
Oh,
paintings and
sure.
walk
Yes.
us through some of your
Yeah.
techniques? And
Yes. Let's see. I'm going to share the screen. I can do that. And these aren't really in any specific order. Um,
remember, you said you were going to show us your first painting that you did, or
oh, well, it's not
your
my
first?
first painting,
Oh,
but I will show you one. And then I'll show you, let's see. I don't know where it is. Maybe it's this one. This is a really early painting of mine. If I can get it to there. Okay. I was so proud of this painting. I don't know when I painted this. I was really proud of it. I used so much pastel on the paper that I don't know if you can see. I have my little pen tool here that I'm gonna draw around. Like these areas, oops. Come on, Photoshop. Like these areas, scratch art? How you now they sell scratch art. When I was growing up, your teacher would have they would give you a piece of paper and you would color on it really dark with all the different colors of in crayon, and then you would cover it in black crayon. I don't know if any of you remember
mhm.
doing that. And then you would scratch through to see the vibrant colors underneath. Well, I did that with this pastel. And of course, this pastel has many, many issues. I was really proud of the color. I was proud of everything about it, but I was so proud of that I had scratched all in this. And this was something that was so fun for me. Of course, now I don't know if you understand how valuable your old paintings are. And I try to tell my students, like, this is where I started, and this has some definite room for improvement. We can say that. I try to be as positive as possible. But one thing I think with artists and with people that want to achieve beauty, we don't always allow ourselves to be beginners. And this is such a beginning painting. And I think, there were times where I think I would post on that wet canvas and I would have people say, oh, this is a terrible painting or whatever, this, you need to do this and this and this. And it would hurt my feelings. And I thought, gosh, I'm never going to learn how to do any of this. And so I really try to remember that and really encourage others instead of telling them, gosh, you have a ways to grow. Because think about a little child, and if they're learning to walk, if they fell down, we wouldn't tell that child, you're terrible. Like, you should never try that again. No, we would talk about the things, or we would tell that child that it was so good, keep going, it was one step. And that's the same thing for art. Well, so this painting was just from my imagination. And then this is the one that I did a couple years ago based on that other painting. And so this is how I grew so much. And this is on black UArt. And these are literally, I took this painting and thought, okay. And I have a YouTube on this process, and I called it Paintings from the Past, where I took for my Patreon students and YouTube, and I would take a painting that I had done early on and I would show it and I would say, okay, this is, like right now, like this is so cut off. These trees are so dark. If I had it, there's way too many sky holes. I do like the path and I do like the scratches, and I don't necessarily do that anymore. But this was kind of how I took that inspiration and I went to this piece. And so this is just, I love this painting, and it was not from a reference photo at all. I kind of went where the painting told me to go. There are some paintings that are just special like that, to where they it's almost, this sounds real artsy fartsy, but I really try never ever to begin a painting unless I can imagine that painting, because that painting exists in the future. It's already, it's in the future. There's something on that paper. And so if I can look at the piece of paper and imagine the painting on it, then I can paint it. I try not to jump in without doing that, because then I don't have a proper pathway to get the painting there. So this is on black UArt. You can see that down here. There's not a lot of underpainting in this piece, but I really, you'll see that in most of my paintings, I don't put very much detail anywhere else but in the middle. I kind of almost leave a vignette effect around the edges, because I don't need somebody to look over here. I want them to look where I want them to look. And so I don't put a lot of effort into the edges of a piece. And that's where, especially when I'm doing an underpainting, you will be able to see more of the brushwork or the watercolor or the acrylic ink or the alcohol. But that's one example of a very early painting of mine. This is probably one of my favorite pieces. This one is from, I don't know if any of you have ever been to White Sands, New Mexico. This is a cloud formation from White Sands, although the ground is not the white sand. If you aren't familiar with White Sands, it's literally, I think it's gypsum, actually, sand dunes that are pure white, that are just in this huge, I think it's a national monument or a national, it's not a national park. I'm not sure what it is, but it looks like snow. It's really hard to paint. But we were out there on a family trip. You have to really want to go, because there's nothing else out there. And it's very, you can take, lots of kids go and they'll take their sleds, and it's really this kind of otherworldly location. But this beautiful cloud formation was in the distance, but I didn't love, it was too hard to paint the ground. And so this was another kind of just made up. And all of this, I don't know if you can see, I'll zoom in. All of this is just alcohol and hard pastel. Like there's very little, there's some right there and some right there, but there's very little dry pastel on the ground layer at all. It's mostly just blue pastel that's been washed in with alcohol. But this is a favorite cloud painting that I have. I did do a little bit of alcohol wash up in this area to form the really blue sky. But that's just an example. I love, love, love to paint clouds. And this one right now, this is in the IAP show right now currently, the Master Circle show. And this one is on Lux Archival. And this has a watercolor underpainting. And so you can kind of see that like right in there. But most all of the orange that you see is just the watercolor that's showing through. I think watercolor on Lux Archival, of course, Lux Archival is so stable. It doesn't do any of the warping or any of the curling like UArt. And so for me, if I'm going to use watercolor, I'm going to do it on Lux Archival. Mm-hmm. And another reason is because it's such a bright white paper that watercolor is a very pure hue, because it doesn't have anything else underneath it to affect it, like the oatmeal color of more of UArt, if that makes sense.
Right.
But one of the things that in this piece I love, let me move this, is I always try to think of armature in my paintings and composition. And I don't have rivers or streams to really show off the S curves that are so prevalent in some areas. So I try to think of that even in terms of where the flowers are pointing back. And so using objects in the piece that aren't necessarily like water as curves, using those objects in different ways in the armature of a piece. I also really love very, very, very high horizons if I'm painting a landscape, or very, very low horizons if I'm painting, even more so than a third, the rule of thirds. I try to even make it even more extreme so people know for sure what the painting is about. Trying to think about anything else about this piece.
Bethany, do you
Yes,
tend to do a lot of vertical work as
I
opposed to
do. That's a
yeah,
great question. And there was something, actually, it was in the Mitch, how did you say his last name? Albala? Albala?
Albala?
Okay. I was reading his, one of his, I think it's a workbook, his landscape
Mhm.
workbook. I had it last year, I had it out and I was going through some of it. And I had noticed that and I had been thinking about the fact that I really do a lot of verticals. I don't do as much traditional horizontal landscapes as I used to. And I didn't really know why until there was a part of his book that was talking about horizontal and vertical lines just in a painting. And for me, my landscape is so horizontal. Everything is long and flat. I mean, there's no vertical trees. And so there's no like dynamic kind of foil for that long horizon. And so for me, I was like, that's why I'm doing it. I'm forcing that vertical view by not having everything be long and flat. And so this is a scene from Paladuro Canyon. Doesn't necessarily look like Paladuro Canyon, but I will often put in kind of distant angles just for composition reasons.
Mhm.
But that really was, I think, an aha moment when I read that book. I was like, that's why I'm doing that, because I want there to be some kind of dynamic difference in my paintings other than just everything is long and flat. And so I do like verticals a lot. Okay, let's
Bethany,
see.
what typically what's your go-to colors for your dark darks?
Oh, dark darks. Well, and so of course, we all love the blue new pastels that, we can't find anymore. Thankfully, I have quite a few of them that I had already bought in bulk. So, but once I am out of those, I'll just come up with something different. I try not to, if I can't control the situation, then I'm just going to do the best that I can. So I
Mhm.
really love the blue new pastel. But I use the inks a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I decided to start using inks is I had a framer years ago who had a coworker, a worker, and I had taken some paintings to her, and she called me on the phone and she said, Bethany, I'm so sorry, but I was beating your painting off in the back and all of the dark fell off of it. And I was like, ugh, oh my gosh, like, don't do that. Of course, I tried not to, bless her heart. She didn't know. And so I really use the inks because I find that especially some of the dark pastels they're so dry that they can flake off a little bit more,
Mhm.
especially when I was matting a lot, and I cannot stand it when there's pastel dust on a mat. And so I started using the ink, and those are really more my darks. Um, I have a Terry Ludwig eggplant. I rarely use it. I use it every now and then. I really like charcoal, actually, fine charcoal, General's charcoal for darks. And I even will use my mechanical pencil to maybe add a little bit of graphite, especially in tree trunks or little branches. I don't know if I have anything like that. This is a piece on Le Carte. I like this. I find that I am a little bit more direct and bold on Le Carte with my mark making than I am on other papers, because you almost have to be, because you can't wash it in, you can't wash it off. You
Right.
can't say, oh, this area didn't work, I'll just add a little bit more alcohol to it and then see where it goes from there. And so this is kind of an example of that. This was This is another Paladuro Canyon piece. I like the broken color kind of in the shadow area and trying to use similar values of opposing colors to add a little bit of vibrancy into areas. And so, you know, if you squint your eye, you can't really tell the colors apart, but you can if you're studying it a little bit more. So that one, and then this one, a lot of you will recognize. This is probably my most watched video on YouTube. Totally didn't intend for it to be. I just recorded it and then it became really popular. And so a lot of people have seen this painting process. You can sort of see this one. This is before I was really, and this one to me has some issues too. I probably wouldn't add as many of these little sky holes all around now. But there's a little bit of pink underneath that yellow. That's acrylic ink. And then there's some dark acrylic ink around the tree, around that little house. But this one, I had no idea that it was going to be watched a lot, but that's one of my probably most seen videos. Hundreds of thousands of views. So for better or for worse, that's the one that people know me by.
So Bethany, somebody's
Yes.
asking the question, do you use a fix or a workable fix at any point in your process?
Sometimes if I think maybe a tree shadow or at the underneath, like, you know, the underbrush of a tree could be a hair darker. Sometimes I use workable fixative to do that. And you can be careful, but I have used workable fixative on Lacarte and it always does fine. So if you haven't picked quite the right value, or you think maybe it just needs a little bit more contrast, I am definitely a painter that has a wide range of values. I admire high key paintings. I admire very low key paintings, but I like a full range. And so you know, this black, that's charcoal on the mirror, on these little, that's just black charcoal, to add those little open doors. I always say if you're gonna paint a house, make a way for people to get inside of it, or to be curious if they walk that way, if they peeked inside, what they would see. Always put windows and doors on your painting or on your buildings, I think. This is another one on Lacarte. This is a little bit more recent. This one, you can kind of see here once again, mark making is a lot more bold, not as blended, I think. And I really do love Lacarte. It's becoming and has become a very favorite paper of mine. I like, once again, I really like the middle values. You can see kind of the paper underneath on the edges. Once again, I don't really work on the edges quite as much. And I think it was, so I had mentioned earlier, I think just to you and Pam, Bonnie, that Lorenzo Chavez, he is out of Parker, Colorado. He comes to Paladuro about every couple of years, and we paint together, and he is the neatest, most wonderful man and artist. He is so dear, and he's so passionate, and he just makes everybody so excited about painting. And so I love to paint with him. And he's a very local colorist, and that was the very first time I ever went to plein air paint. I cried all the way home. I just burst into tears. I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. I am a terrible artist. And this is after I had already been PSA. I had already been in New York, and I just never really had the opportunity to plein air paint because nobody really comes to Amarillo. We're really in the middle of nowhere. But he came. And so he's a local colorist, but I push color. And so I was so frustrated because I didn't have any of the colors that I was seeing. And so I thought that I couldn't paint like I knew. And so it was really, really hard. And of course, nature is just screaming at you everywhere. And working mostly from photographs like I do, it's already cropped for me. I don't have to make decisions. It doesn't change as much as natural light does. And so, but he definitely taught me, and going back to that sky holes. I used to put sky holes everywhere, and he really instructed and taught me Don't break up your shapes so much. Keep your shapes strong. Simplify. We don't have to make them all so spotty everywhere. And that has really helped, I think, my work. This is another one on la carte. I don't know why I have all these la carte ones, but once again, you can see how little pastel. It's just really much like right here. All of this is just paper. And this one was in I can't remember if this one was in an IAPS exhibit or the Enduring Brilliance, but this painting took me, I record almost all my paintings because I've been teaching for so long and I share them with my students. I have kind of gotten in the habit of recording my paintings, and this one took me 12 minutes, start to finish. And that's all it needed. It didn't need anything else. I told the story of what I wanted it to be. And so people say often, how do you know when you're finished? How do I know when my painting is finished? And that's such a hard, I still have to really think about that too. But once you have that first, like, oh, I'm liking this, that right then, that's when you stop right then and take a step back and go get a cup of coffee, let your painting marinate on your mind a little bit, come back, maybe take a picture of it, look at the picture of it, but try not to fuss with the painting too much, because then you can kind of lose that spontaneity and the freshness that you had. So that very first moment that you think this is going right, step away. Now the hard thing is when it's going wrong, and then you think, I just need to add more colors. That must be what I need to do.
Right.
But that's another issue. So a lot of times people just panic instead of taking a step back. They think I'm going to add to it. And really, oftentimes it's what you need to take away that will help the painting.
That piece is such a dynamic piece. I'm just sitting here looking at it, and it just glows.
Well,
And
thank you.
And I think that, it's one of those things, just like you said, like less is more.
Less is more. And really the heaviest application is here. Like that's the heaviest. And of course, there's a few little sky holes, but I didn't put any up here. It's just a suggestion. It's just a light. It's almost like a dream. And that's how I kind of want my work to look.
And that's on
This is on la carte.
Yeah.
It's on la carte.
Beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Thank you. And then this one is a charcoal underpainting, and this one sold at American Impressionist Society exhibit. That's such a hard show to get into, and if you're a pastelist, that's such a great show to be in. But this one sold, and this one is all charcoal. It's a completely black underpainting. My sister lives near Charleston, which could not be more of a different landscape than I have where I live. And so I love to visit her and paint her marshes because we just don't have anything like that here. And so I've always liked this piece. It was one of those that sold, and I wasn't in, I was kind of sad. I was like, oh, I didn't say goodbye to it. I thought it would come back to me. And so I don't know who has it somewhere. I hope they're enjoying it. But this is on UR. You could kind of see a little bit of that alcohol wash. It's just right back, it's charcoal and alcohol. And all of this is just that. And then I kind of just scribbled right here. Like it's not even very finished. I probably just entered it because I don't even know why, but this is the one they selected and this is the one that sold. So I was really, really blessed about that. I think that might be all that I have here. Oh, here's this one. There's this
Bethany,
one.
are you, when you submit work to the shows and you say you submit 3 or 4 pieces, are you sometimes surprised at which one is accepted?
Oh, yes. Every time. I'm always like, okay. But I've been a judge and a juror many times. And so now I realize that there's so many factors that go into what is chosen for a show, the look of the show overall. And so really it's just up to that judge or that juror, what is being selected. This one right here is acrylic ink. And so you can see all of that acrylic ink, even on the sides, all here. That's probably, and then right here, this is the blue. This is all the blue acrylic ink. This is this is kind of an older piece, but I wanted to show you kind of an acrylic ink, what that looked like. It's a little bit more opaque than a watercolor. And I love to use warms under areas that are going to be warm and cools under areas that are supposed to be cool. So, and then learning about, this was another piece of me learning, oh, trunks of trees aren't really brown. Like they're not brown a lot. They're going to, if they're in the sun, they're going to be, especially where I live, they're going to be orange because they're being lit by the warm sun. And so really using that direct observation and really noticing color, even though I'm not plein air painting as much, I'm taking that information into my studio because I'm always looking pretty closely at my environment. And I love the lost and found edges too. And then this one is also acrylic ink. All of this dark is acrylic ink. This one was a fun piece. I don't paint a lot of fences, but this one is out in Canyon, Texas, which is just right near Paladuro Canyon, if any of you have ever been there. But using, and another thing that I do in skies and clouds a lot is I will tone the paper. So the clouds up here that are peach, the paper is toned the peach color. And so the paper becomes actually the cloud. And then I carve into that paper color to make the sky. So instead of putting the cloud color on top of blue, I put blue on top of the cloud color, if that makes sense.
Nice, nice.
And that makes them a little bit less chalky and makes them a little bit glowier, especially if I'm using I love to use the warm colors in the sky to do that. So that's one thing that I like to do. See, oh, and then here, this is, I love to paint geraniums. I don't paint a lot of flowers, but here's one. And this is another technique where this is black paper. And you can see my brush strokes that I painted on. So you can underpaint on black paper. This one has underpainting on it. You can see all of my little brush strokes. I put down probably more local color, more my shadow color anyway, I guess. And then used a brush and some alcohol to create some of that texture. And then I cut over it with the light dappled shades of color. And so I'm an experimenter. I love to experiment and see what's going to work for me. And if it doesn't work for me, then I may feel bad for a day. Whenever we don't paint something aren't we so hard on ourselves? It's just like, I'm a terrible person or whatever, or I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And just really like I beat myself up terribly whenever I'm struggling with something. And I haven't been painting as much as I normally do. And so I definitely feel a little rustier than I did when I was painting almost daily. I don't paint quite as much just because I'm a little bit more fatigued than I normally am. My studio's in a different place. I don't come up here into this room a lot. It's not as quite as happy and bright as my other room. Not that it's not happy, it's a happy room, but so I'm all for experimentation. I really try to ground myself though from too much bad self-talk, because once again, I can remind myself that, not everything has to be a masterpiece. It's about the process of creating, not necessarily the product. And I think we can be too focused on Instagram and putting out a painting every single day and getting likes and getting comments. And it's exhausting to keep that pace up. And so really just trying to not do that and be grounded in your painting.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important, Bethany, and that is every painting doesn't have to be a masterpiece. There should be a learning process, and if you're learning something from doing a bad painting, if you will, um, it's a learning process,
Absolutely.
and I just think, and even, you know, and to be able to, not necessarily, maybe you don't have the energy or any of us, maybe we don't have the time in the day to, carve out an hour or more in the studio, but why not just get up early in the morning, an extra 15 minutes and read a book or do, sketch something or,
Mm-hmm.
do something artful. And I think it's just good for your brain and
It really
for your
is. It's
soul.
so calming. And I think about that summer that my husband had been laid off. I wasn't trying to paint for a show. I wasn't painting for Instagram. I was painting for me because it gave me joy and it gave me peace. And so I try to remember that. That's why I wanted to paint. Is I all I had to think about was the color, and it was just a peaceful, not necessarily cathartic. I have to say that I paint out of joy. I want to paint happy things. I don't want to paint something. And there are some artists that they really want to paint in more of a cathartic way to get out negative emotions, and that's what works for them. But what works for me, I almost can't paint if I'm depressed or sad. I want because what comes out of me is not satisfying, and so in this season that I'm in now, that's been a little bit more challenging because I have had a lot of different emotions, but it's just almost, you know, picking yourself up by the bootstraps and say, I'm gonna do this for joy's sake. And
Yeah.
because I want to put beauty out into the world and not something that's negative. And so that's why I started. I wanted to have something pretty to paint whenever I was feeling, down all those years ago. And here we are 10 years later. And I think so much. If my husband hadn't lost his job that summer, and now, he found a job very quickly. He's very successful. But if he hadn't, would I have pulled out those pastels? I don't know, and so I'm so thankful for that. Um, Kind of those harder days because it gave me something that I didn't know that I needed. And in this season that I'm in now, I feel the same way. Maybe in 10 years, and I'm going to get there. In 10 years from now, look back and I'll think, gosh, I'm, thankful because that taught me how to be even more grateful than I already am.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think about that.
Good. So on framing, Bethany,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts about framing? I mean, some people frame right up against the glass, some
Sure,
use a spacer,
for sure.
some still do mats, etc. So what's your
Well,
go?
I have, you'll see this one. This one was a plein air piece
Mhm.
out of the canyon, and it's matted. And then I have here, I'll take this one off the wall. I have this one that it has a fillet, and I really like the fillets um, to kind of just I don't know, help the painting pop a little bit off of the wall and out of the frame. I don't necessarily do as many mats as I used to, unless the piece is really small or it just needs some more weight on the wall. For one thing, matting adds so much expense, and I do all museum glass for my pieces, even for my clients and a show. I try to always use museum glass, even though it's very pricey, because I want the paintings to look as good as possible, and that is such a huge factor in not that glare that you can't see a piece. And so that helps me save a little bit. I've never framed against the glass, but then I don't do my own framing. I try to always. I have a great framer here that we have a good relationship, and I don't know what he would do. We don't really have the issue of moisture here where we live between the glass and or any fogging. We have it's so arid here that we don't have that issue. So I've never had to do that before.
All right. And shipping, any tips for the audience about shipping work?
I love, of course, I use air float frames if I'm shipping a framed piece. I just got one back from the Enduring Brilliance show in New York. Actually, just yesterday, I got one back. The air float boxes are fantastic for shipping. I ship via UPS. A lot of people use FedEx, but my FedEx facility here, they don't they don't do return labels. And so when you ship to an exhibit, usually you have to also send a return label, so then the exhibit can send it back to you. And with the FedEx here, I don't know if the people there just don't want to learn how to do it or don't do it, but they've always told me it can't be done. And so I use UPS, and for whatever reason, it's always worked for me. But then if I'm shipping an unframed piece, I ship just in a foam core kind of a little sandwich. And I also have some YouTube videos on that process. I just cut the foam core about an inch wider than the piece, use some artist tape, the black artist tape, to tape the piece in, kind of a hinge tape, put a piece of glassine and then another piece of foam core. And that way it's nice and stable. Usually ship in a flat box. Like I'll get the long free boxes, the oh, what's it called? The Postal Service, the one that, what's it called? So see, this is where chemotherapy and my brain don't go together, because I can't remember the word for, like, it ships fast. I don't know. Priority
It's a
mail
priority,
shipping.
priority mail.
Yes, thank you. Priority mail shipping boxes. I don't pop them out. I'll just keep them flat and then put the paintings in there. And I've always had success with that. So I mostly paint fairly small. I don't usually paint big. I did paint this one the other day. This is on a full sheet of Lacarte, though, and it's a lot bigger than some of my other ones. So this one would be hard to ship unless it was framed, I think, because it's really hard to find something this large. So I will probably either exhibit this one locally, so then I wouldn't have to worry about shipping that. But mostly I'm painting 9x12s, 8x10s and under. I'm really comfortable, since I learned painting in a small format. I'm really comfortable painting in a small format. And they're much easier to handle, much easier to store, etc.
Nice. Well, Bethany, we're getting kind of to the end of this. We're just a little bit past 2:00 my time. I'm in Mountain Time, and so any final words for the audience that you'd like to share?
Just keep painting. Keep, think of the process, not the product. Remember that little boy or little girl you used to be. What was the very first thing you ever remembered creating, and why did you like it? How did it make you feel? And try to take that into your painting practice now. Of course, we love to be in a show. We're artists. We want to be in, Pastel Society of the West Coast has amazing shows, amazing exhibits, amazing artists in your community. And so there's a little bit of competitive edge there. There's nothing like a painting hanging with your friends in another show to encourage you and to inspire you to keep doing that. And so that's wonderful. And I'm not saying not to value that, because it is wonderful, but try not to make it your end all be all of why you're painting. We paint for different various reasons, but just don't stop. Don't give up. Remember that little child.
That's great advice, I think. And so with that, we've got lots of people saying thank you for your time and sharing. Bonnie Canale says, Bethany, thank you so much for sharing your golden nuggets of wisdom. Wishing you well on your current journey. You inspire us in so many ways.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Bethany. It was wonderful. Best wishes for your journey to health. Thank you so much. Anyway, I am just delighted that you took the time out of your day to visit with me, and we'll be looking and watching for more beautiful
Yes.
Bethany paintings on Instagram and social media. So
Well, thank you so much.
do take good care, and thanks again.
Thank you,
Thank you
Bethany.
so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. I see so many so many names of people that I know. And of course, I love the artist community. I've never felt so held and loved than these last few months of just so much support. And I really, really appreciate every note that I get, every sentiment I get is so meaningful to me. And I really, really appreciate it.
All right.
I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna be better. I'm getting
You'll-
better every day.
You'll do well. Good, very good.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
Bethany.
Take good care.
Yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
all
All right.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for
Bye.
joining us.
And
Bye-bye.
everyone, thanks. We have we're working on our schedule for 2025 for We Talk, and we're scheduling a session every 2 months. So stay tuned, and we'll be seeing you on We Talk Art. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.